Match Fishtank, Unit 8, Lesson 4, Minilesson. In this mini lesson, we're going to look at the shape of distributions, mostly dot plots and histograms, and try to see what information we can get from looking at the shape of these. So one way to describe a histogram or a dot plot or another distribution, distribution is just a word meaning the data that we have. Particularly, we use it to refer to visual ways of looking at the data, is by calling it symmetrical. You might remember symmetry means that two sides of something are exactly the same. So this butterfly could be described as being symmetrical because each side looks identical. In this histogram, it's really easy to see that this is a symmetrical distribution. This dot plot is also considered to be symmetrical because it doesn't have to be exactly perfect in order to be symmetrical. These are examples of histograms and dot plots that are skewed left. Now, that terminology is a little odd. It's kind of easy to apply the word skew to these because skew means something is off to the side from where you would expect it to be. These are definitely skewed. They have more of their data on one side. More data points are over, in this case, on the right side of the distribution. But it's hard to understand how from there you would call that skewed left. Well, one way to remember this is to think of looking for the tail or the small amounts of data. And in this case, the tail is off to the left, just like the tail on this dog is. So we call a distribution skewed left when its tail is off to the left-hand side. And that means the bulk of the data points are on the right-hand side. Similarly, of course, we can describe something as skewed right, which means that the bulk of the data points are to the right or to the left side of the data display, and the tail is off to the right side. So when you're trying to determine whether something is skewed left or skewed right, look for the direction of the tail. And remember, it's the tail that tells you left or right. Another word we use to describe distributions and their shape is a cluster. A cluster is a group of data points that are all, well, clustered together or put together. So in this example, you can see two different clusters of data points. If I were using this to describe, say, a test that students did in my math class, I could be confident that this group of students over here on the right had really understood the math from based on their scores. I've got a couple in the 70 to 80 band, some in the 80 to 90 band, and some in the 90 to 100 band. But I also have a large group of students, a cluster, who are in the lower end here. So I would definitely be needing to look at some ways to bring their understanding up. Looking at clusters can help you see patterns in the data. A final word that we use when we're describing the shape of distributions is that of an outlier. Now, an outlier is something that lies on the outside. There are very formal definitions that you'll get to later in statistics, but in this case, you can easily see that this data point between 20 and 30 on the histogram as a single data point is significantly different from the rest of the data points over here on the right. If you're thinking, hey, is this a skewed left distribution? You're absolutely right, because the tail is going off to the left. And in this case, because there's only one little data point in that tail, that data point is called an outlier. It's way out on the end of the tail, and it's not really in line with the rest of the data. So these ideas about how we can identify the shape of distributions, whether it's symmetrical, whether it's skewed, whether there are clusters, and whether there's an outlier, can help us analyze how data appears, particularly when we're looking at a visual representation.